Hello everyone and welcome back to our YouTube channel for another exciting tutorial on DaVinci Resolve. And today I just want to look a little bit at kind of my personal workflow. A couple of people have asked whether or not we could sort of show the workflow that we kind of undertake, and what do you do if you're going to kind of round trip out to another editor. Essentially what we want to try and do in this instance is we've got a project that we're working on, and you'll have to forgive me, I've already brought in the X5R clips from the Osmo into Cinelight and then got them in a raw format on my hard drive ready to begin working with. Again, my aim is to edit in Premiere, and we're going to start off with DaVinci Resolve though for the clips that we shot on the X5R so that we can get the most from them. And you know what we've got here, if I open up one of my drives and we look at the media folder I've got ready for it, so we've got the A7S footage, the Mavic Pro footage and the X5R footage, and I've created 3 folders for the X5R. I've got the H.264, so these are just the clips that came in straight off the camera and on the micro SD card as opposed to on the SSD. I'd like to bring those in just purely so I've got them as a backup. They're quite quick to back up as well. And then obviously I've got the raw files all brought in here out of Cinelight, some sort of 70 gigs worth. So quite a lot of footage there. Only about 13 clips or so, but it just shows you this sort of size really of the raw footage that it takes up. And the ProRes folder here is ready and available, waiting for me to process these raws into ProRes, which is going to be my editing codec of choice. So that's essentially that's the folder structure I normally run with initially. And first thing we're going to do is fire up DaVinci Resolve, still using the 12.5 version. And this is the unpaid version as well, I should add. So equally, if you've got any footage, maybe you're shooting on the X5S camera and you're shooting cinema DNGs on that, then again, you can't go beyond UHD, I'm afraid, on this particular format of DaVinci Resolve. You have to go for the next model up, which is the paid version. It's only $1,000, I believe, and it's still, I think, incredible value. Plus, you get some noise reduction technology in there as well, which makes for me a lot of sense if you're using this sort of editor a lot, and I am actually. So I think it won't be long before we end up upgrading as well. But for the meantime, it's in the free version, the 12.5 release, and I'm just going to rename this project to, let me think, yesterday's date, and there we go. So this is for a project we're working on, and it's a fascinating project. 2 runners who are going to run 10 marathons in 10 days, so it's going to be quite exciting, and that is going to kick off in April. So I'm going to launch open to this project by double clicking, and we're in a brand new project, and actually I'm working in a dual monitor workspace here, so I'm just going to change that back for you guys to see it a little bit more easily. So turn that off. Here we go. So now I'm in my sort of traditional standard workspace that you'd see in DaVinci Resolve, and we're just going to go through this. So initially I need to find my clips, so I'm going to go to my edit drive where I know they're at, bring it down into this 10 to London project, open this up, open media folder up, video, X5R, raw. Okay, and here are all my raw cinema DNG folders. I'm just going to drag them into the media pool. Okay, so one thing I haven't done here, which is sort of against my normal thing, is I haven't changed my frame rate. So obviously these are all filmed at 25 frames per second. I'm in a default project, which by default is going to be 24 frames per second. So I am going to change that so that make sure that it changes the project to 25 frames per second. At this point, I'm going to just quickly pause, run down to my project settings, and make sure I've got everything set up as I need it to be. I've actually got a preset already organized for UHD, RAW, DNG, to ProRes 4444 optimized. So I'm going to dive onto that preset and hit load. There we go, and that's done that. So come out of that, and now what we should see is all these clips are going to start going a little bit grayer, and that's because now it's reading the color space properly for the project that I've set up, and we've got our clips all in here. And again, all these clips will start sort of graying out as I look at them more. So they're all my clips, and they're in the media pool, and I've got a project, and I'll just go run you through those master project settings again. So I'm going to work in UHD, so Ultra HD 4K, so 3840 2160, 25 frames per second because I'm in PAL land. Image scaling, optimized for sizing for proxy mode, optimized for playback, leaving everything else fairly straightforward. This is quite important, scale the entire image to fit. That means that when we do optimize the media down to a lower size resolution, we can actually just still fit the image in, and there's no kind of odd cropping or anything that's going to happen. So I tend to leave it like that. Editing's the same color, leave the same. Camera raw, make sure we go up to the top here, come down to Cinema DNG because this is what we're working with, and it's going to be white balance as shot, color space Blackmagic design, gamma Blackmagic design film, tick the highlight recovery, drop the sharpness from the default 10, leave it at that, and then if you want to add sharpness you can do that later on. Color management, because I'm working on a Mac, I tend to turn this off because I find that does give me some very odd colors, and you can't really tell from your scopes that you've actually graded your footage correctly or not. So I make sure I turn that off just to get a more realistic sort of interpretation of the footage. General options, so this one will get changed depending on your setup and your system setup, but normally that one I tend to leave the same. The optimized media, which we're going to do in a second. So I'm going to optimize this to ProRes 444 for HDR because I'm on a system that can handle that footage. So I'm going to do that, but I have dropped, I've gone away from the choose automatically to the half resolution. So what's going to happen is, because if you leave it to choose automatically, DaVinci Resolve will basically say, well, I'll try and make the resolution of the optimized media as close to the actual timeline specs or the project specs as possible. So in this instance, DaVinci Resolve would pretty much try and make me a 4K optimized media version, which isn't kind of going to help me with the optimized media. What I really want to do is reduce the optimized media resolution a little bit. So that's going to now drop to 1920 by 1080. And that's a resolution that my computer can handle really quite happily. And you could easily drop to quarter resolution if it was something that your computer was struggling. That's often a worthwhile thing to do. Or equally, you could make this a 1920 project, allow for the scaling to scale the images for you, and then make your proxies half of 1920 1080, so you're working with a 1280 720 proxy or optimized media version. Edit beautifully on a very low spec machine, especially if you change your format to something like just standard ProRes 422. Edit beautifully, and then just before you go back to rendering out, you simply would change your master project settings back to a 4K and then export, and that will be less taxing on your system, at least allowing you to edit and trim the footage. So anyway, that's all the settings set up. I have changed my cache location, so I'm on put it on a nice fast drive. It's actually on the same drive where all the video footage is, and it just goes into a cache clip folder there. And I just do that because otherwise it can swell and make your hard drive, because it defaults to your main hard drive. So I just change it just to stop that from happening. Anyway, so project's all set up, ready to go. One thing we now need to do is optimize our media. So I shall go to my media pool, marquee, select everything there, right click, optimize media, and that will go off and optimize the media for me, so it's easy to work with. Okay, cool, and we're back. So basically we've just had all of the optimized media created, and if we go to the list view, we can see the optimized media, half res, perfect. All of that footage is ready to go. And now we should be able to work with it quite easily and quite swiftly. If you don't see, incidentally, if you don't see that optimized media column, you can right click and then find the optimized media and give it a tick, and then it will show up for you. So there it is. Okay, so we're going to jump across to the edit tab, and we want to look at this in the icon mode. So we've got all the icons there. I'm just going to hide that bin there to make it a little bit easier, give us a bit more room. And essentially what I'm going to do is grab all these clips, throw them down onto the timeline, and just press Shift Z to bring the whole timeline into view. Obviously this window on the left here is our sort of source viewer, so we can load up different clips. And then we've got this one on the right, which is our project, which is quite similar to a lot of editing platforms. And you can see how swiftly and easily I'm just now scrolling through this footage. And I know there's a couple of duff clips in here. So what I'm going to do, and I'll just show you with the first clip what I'm going to do before I allow you to leave me for a second or two to do this. So this is the first clip. Let's just have a look. So you can see we're scrolling along here. And probably I will get rid of, although, I mean, I could scale it out. There's a little, you can see just hitting the bottom here, there's a car window, wind mirror. I'm just going to probably say, let's think here. Let's play it forward. So you'll notice it's playing back at real time. Probably about there. I'm going to just get the trim tool. So you can either click this button here or press the T for trim. And you simply just find the little sort of magnet looking trim icon like that, and you click and drag it down, and that's just going to trim the end of the clip. And at the moment I haven't got snapping turned on, so it's going to let me just sort of drag past that clip, past the playhead. If I turn my snapping on by pressing that or N, then when I do the same thing again, wrong icon, there we go, and it will now snap to my playhead indicator, so that's perfect. And you can then scroll along. So that's the start of my clip. I'm going to work along from there, and again, I've given myself a little bit of room for a handle if I wanted to, so I could probably cut to there. If I wanted to in the edit, I could probably cut to there, but I could start a bit further back if I need to. So that's the clip. So here they go, jogging along, and that looks good, and it's very smooth. And to about, I think there's a car coming along in a minute, and I'm going to get my head taken off. So, oh, there, probably about there. So that's where I'm going to trim to. So probably just trim it right to the very end, using the arrow keys just a step forward and back. Probably going to trim it right to the very end of that usable section. And again, I'm just going to get the icon and drag that way. Okay, so that's that. So there's my first moving clip. Right, so obviously there'll be a little bit of work to do on that, but moving along to the next clip. And this one I know didn't work. It was one of those ones we just went past them a bit too fast. Didn't have everything quite focused in properly either. Oh, maybe we did actually. I might use this one. So anyway, so let's say I'll start it maybe there, and I'm going to trim it down. There is another way of doing this as well. You can press the Alt and the bracket key. Oh, beg your pardon, Shift and the bracket key, and that will do the same thing. So that will actually, what it will do is it will trim the end of this clip or the beginning of this clip. If you use the left bracket, it will do this edit point, and if you use the right bracket key, it will do this edit point. So watch here. We're going to go through here, and that's probably where we'll leave them, about there. And I'm going to press Shift, right bracket, and it's just trimmed the other end of this edit point right down to where my playhead was. And that's another very, very quick way of doing it, just going Shift bracket to trim the clips rather than even having to worry about dragging them. It's a very nice way of working, as I say. So anyway, what I'm going to do now, guys, because you're probably going to get bored of me watching through these trims, so I'm just going to go through basically the remainder of these trim sections here, and then once we've done all the trimming, I will come back and we'll go through onto the color module. Okay, so don't go anywhere, and we'll be right back. Okay, welcome back everybody. So what we're going to do now is we've finished all of these clips and they're all trimmed and ready to go. In fact, brought some more clips in here as well. So actually we had to bring some more clips in because there was 2 days of filming as it happens. So we got 2 lots of clips in here now. So anyway, we're going to dive over to the color tab, and now that we're in the color tab, you'll see that we can see the node tree, the window, and obviously all of our color correction tools down here at the bottom. And actually we haven't got the timeline or the clips turned on, so I sometimes like to have the clips turned on because then we can see all of the clips that we're going to be using to check over and grade and correct if need be. You can put the timeline on as well. Obviously that sort of helps a visualization of where you are with things, because obviously the clips is literally just the broad clip. It doesn't actually give you any kind of scrolling capability, but I find that turning the timeline off, I can still scroll here and scroll the clip just well enough. So having just the clips to jump along to is really nice. And actually if you're in dual workspace mode, dual screen mode like that, what will happen is these clips actually break out onto a whole separate window on the other side, and it looks really nice, and actually is a really nice way of working if you have 2 monitors. Otherwise they appear here, and obviously you can just toggle them on and off like so. There you go. So, and you can choose as well, there's a whole thing, you know, just the selected clips and a whole load of stuff as well. So you can sort of really fine tune what you're seeing. But for now, we're going to get started on this, and so let's just take this very first clip for an example. First, we're going to go to this node. We're going to change the label to exposure. And now this is going to be our exposure node. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll to a point in the clip. Maybe this is a good one to grade perhaps. And what we're going to do is we just use the offset, gain, gamma and lift controls down here to fine tune how this is showing. And for me, it's possibly a little underexposed. It's certainly well short of the 1000 IRE line up here. So what we're going to do is use the offset wheel a little bit here and just move the whole trace up a fraction. So it's sort of sitting a little bit more centrally. Okay, and again, we're going to fine tune this a little bit. We'll then go to the lift. Is be basically looking at our shadowy areas or shadow areas of the image. So we're looking at the bottom parts of the trace, and we're going to use that wheel to bring this down a little bit. Now, bear in mind, we are trying to end up with a flatter sort of graded image. So bear in mind, if I was grading normally, I might try and stretch everything up like so to add a bit of contrast and a little bit of pop, and then maybe add some saturation, all the rest of it. But obviously this image itself is going to look too contrasty. So what we actually want to do, I'm just going to reset the lift, reset the offset, reset the gain. So that's, we're back to where we were. And I'm going to just change the offset ever so slightly to correct the overall exposure. And I might just use a little bit of gain as well, and a little bit of lift, just a fraction. Not too much, but just enough, because bear in mind, we're going to put a lot on top of this. So what we're trying to really do is make this look as much like a flat sort of S-log style, I suppose curve if you want, just to make sure there's not too much clipping going on anywhere in the image particularly, whether it's sort of down at the bottom end and we're crushing the blacks or clipping away the highlights. And what I will actually do is use this option here to come across to number 2, slide across to shadows and highlights. And this is where I like to play a little bit and just see what kind of recovery we're going to get from that. I mean, as it actually happens, it was a horrible grey British day. Very little definition in the clouds at all, and there will be a little bit of opportunity to pop those out later, but for now there's not a lot. And again, the shadows, if we wanted to, we could bring the shadows up a little bit more, just to give us some room to play later with. Because bear in mind, we're going to use a lot of the grade is going to really come in later. So I might just use a bit of mid-tone detail just to see what happens. We're actually sort of adding, like if you think of it like at the clarity slider, we're going to add a little bit of clarity. So what we might just do is just add a smidgen of clarity. Definitely make sure you don't go negative, otherwise everything goes very gooey. I would bring it back somewhere. And it's a very fine tune amount. I probably just move it to about 25, something like that. It just does a very little tiny bit and just helps add a little bit of something to that image. So without the grade on, it looks like that, and with the grade on, it's like that. Now I would say that's now correctly exposed for our prior to our grade being applied, prior to say a LUT being applied, etc. And the idea is, again, I want to try and use this footage and match this footage up as nicely as possible to the A7S footage. So that's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to go through the whole rest of the footage and do the same thing. And I'm just going to look at another particular troublesome clip, perhaps. Let's say this clip here. We've got the runners running along the road, and I might just again look at this clip, and because the trace is very different here in this clip, a lot of the image is actually sat right at the bottom. And I think what happened here is, the sun's gone in a little bit, haven't mended the controls on the camera, and we've ended up with a very dark clip. So again, what I'm going to do is just add a node here. No, sorry, not add a node. I'm going to change the label, make it exposure, and again we're going to fiddle with the offset just to bring the offset up a little bit. Again, bear in mind, we don't want to end up going to a situation where we start seeing this happening in the scopes here, because that means we're clipping the image, and it means that it's very, very hard to bring anything back from that point onwards. So what we're really trying to do here is, if I reset the offset, what we're really trying to do is just move this trace up a little bit so it's a little bit more evenly balanced throughout. And bear in mind that this particular shot will end up, or should end up, looking a little bit darker, because it is a dark image. It was very dark when we shot it, actually. The clouds had come over, it was sort of enclosed over with trees, and it was very dark. So again, from a sort of stylistic point of view, we're going to end up with it being quite a dark image anyway, more than likely. So again, all I'm doing here is just trying to stretch the trace out a little bit more without overdoing it. I think I can probably bring the lift up a bit. There we go. So now I've got an image that is just a bit more, it's going to look kind of grey and kind of dull. And the whole point is that when we throw the contrast in later, we throw the saturation in, it's going to look really, really nice. And again, we're trying to hang on to as many of these details in the clouds as we possibly can. And I mean, again, according to this image, we should be pretty much okay in terms of hanging on to some of those highlights particularly. What I will do again is I'll bring the highlights down a little bit, see if there's anything there. You can see how they, when I blow them right out, when I bring them back, blow them out, bring them back. The trouble is, what you're not seeing today is, in this particular day, the clouds were very white. It was kind of a white, less defined sky. So if you had like a blue sky with lots of nice clouds and stuff there, you probably would see more highlight imagery coming back, more highlight definition coming back rather. So we're going to just move the shadows again, just play the shadows. I might just lift the shadows ever so slightly, just to, again, this is about giving me the maximum dynamic range for my grading process, which will happen next. This is the correction process, so just bear that in mind. And overall, yeah, that image looks pretty good. And again, this project is a project that's supposed to be turned around quite quickly, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time really perfecting this particular image, because I know that A, I'm going to do some grading anyway, and B, it's going to be online delivery. The grade can be a little bit looser, to be fair. So, and again, speed in this project is very important. So that's good enough for the time being. It's going to give me maximum opportunity to work with the image later as well. So for now, I'm going to leave it like that. And what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to now just go through all of these clips and do exactly the same thing with all of these, just neaten them up, tidy them up, make sure I've got a nice flat set of images to work with, and then it will be on to the deliver stage. So what we'll do is, if we take a short breather, I'll get this done and be right back in about 2 seconds, and we'll carry on with the rest of it. So take a second and I'll be right back. Okay, great. So we've come back and I have graded all of the clips that we had on the timeline now. So we've got a much flatter, consistent set of images there from the X5R, and I've got a sort of trace now. If you look at the trace, they tend to sort of sit sort of middle-ish, somewhere in the middle there, just of the trace, not too high, not too low, so not too much contrast, not too much color, and the idea is sort of saturation. So and the idea being that we're going to obviously grade it later. So happy with my set of images now, so we're going to proceed to the deliver tab, and now I'm at the deliver tab. I have to just get some things set up, so I'm going to hit Shift Z to just bring, or Shift Z I should say, to bring the clips all into the timeline, and I can see them all there clearly. And I'm going to set some things up. So what I want to do here is I want to send all of these clips, although some of them are actually, is sort of from an original clip, and I've cut them up into 2 or 3 little clips. So what I want to do is send all of these out as individual new clips. So going to go to custom, individual clips. Video, yes, I want to export the video. What format we're going to export that in? So I'm going to go QuickTime, and for this instance, I'm actually going to go to 444, and I'm going to use that one, and I'm going to leave the field rendering as is. Render at source resolution, that's absolutely fine. So resolution is there. Actually, that is the source resolution, so I'll just leave that as is. Advanced settings, the only thing I really want to make sure I don't do here is go and tick use optimized media. In this instance, it wouldn't be too bad. It wouldn't be the biggest thing in the world or the biggest problem in the world. It would just mean that I would have the optimized media going as my sort of source file that it would be creating the new media from. And obviously, you don't necessarily want to create sort of optimized media of optimized media, if that makes sense. So we certainly don't want to render off the top of that. So individual clips, video, set your codec resolution choice, 12 down advanced. Make sure optimized media is unticked, which it should be. Okay, we're happy with that. Moving on to audio. None of these clips have any audio with them, so we're going to export some audio. Sorry, not going to export the audio, so we're going to turn that off. And then file, this is where we're going to give it a name. So we want to use, the way I prefer to do it is to use a source name. So, and then use unique file names and make that a suffix. And the reason I like to do that is because we're then going to use the original source name of the original raw clip, so that I will always be able to reference back to it, but now it's going to give it a brand new suffix. And I'm going to just make that a 3-digit suffix. That should be fine. Don't necessarily need it to go anywhere else. And the only thing I need to do is tell it where to go by going back up to the top here, location, browse, find where I want to put it. So if you remember, earlier on we created some raw clips. So X5R ProRes raw. So that folder here, this is where this new ProRes folder is waiting for these clips to go. So I'm going to just hit OK. There we go. And so they're now going to go there once they're done. So that is a completed render settings, and I'm just going to go add all these selected clips to render queue, and there they are. So they're now sitting up here, job 1, ready to go, and 30 clips to be processed. So they're going to go, and if you want to edit them, you can click on this little pen, and you can come back over here and fiddle with the settings, and you can either cancel it or add a new job. So I'm going to go cancel, leave it as it is, and hit start render. Great, so there it is, rendering away, first clip's going, the rest of the clips are going to be working away after that. And once that's finished, I will come back and we'll look at the next stage, which will be taking all of this footage that I've now just prepared for the edit into Premiere Pro And actually what we'll do is we'll do that on a brand new video working within Premiere Pro and taking the footage in from there. But essentially this is the DaVinci Resolve side of the workflow using the DJI X5R. So it's a bit more of a compressed version of the series that we've already released, and the idea being that this is supposed to give you an idea of how I use the software and how I flow through my process of getting clips ready to edit myself or to send out to potentially an editor, but certainly in this instance I'm going to be doing the project in Premiere Pro, so I wanted to get the clips prepared and then sent out in a ProRes format, ready and easy for me to edit. So that's where we're going to pick up the next time you come back. Thank you very much for watching. If you have enjoyed this video, please do take a second to subscribe. It would mean the world if you could do that. Equally, share and like the video as well if it's been of use. So thank you very much indeed again for checking this out. See you next time, guys.